What I'd like to do before we get into it is for our panellists just to maybe not necessarily describe who you are. I think we know that. Maybe what you do in colloquial terms and what's making you excited at the moment, Malcolm.
Oh, thanks, Adrian. Well, as you said in your introduction, effectively I head up what I suppose in any other state jurisdiction would be the Metropolitan Planning Agency for the ACT. But also, I think in an ongoing basis, our statutory function very much is to look after those aspects of Canberra which are truly nationally significant. But at the same time, to play a part in the way in which we can support the ACT government in its transformational agenda for the city. Canberra's DNA has always, from the very beginning, been one of a city prepared to take a bit of a punt to try different things. Indeed, my early career, pre-self-government in the NCDC, was to work in an agency that was prepared to have a go, to do what I call, when I give talks about this, urban experimentation. And perhaps the new catch cry is urban innovation. And whatever the term we want to ascribe to it, what I'm excited about is living and working in a city where I feel I can sense that change. I can sense the opportunity that will flow from a recognition that, given our lack of economic diversity as a city, we do need to find new paradigms, not accept the current orthodoxy that perhaps bedevils other capital cities, but to strike out and continue, if you like, the legacy of the very good planning that we all enjoy today. We have a really high quality of life, according to many international indices. How do we continue that quality of life, but do that in a way where sustainable growth, sustainability being measured across many indices, social, environmental, as well as economic sustainability. And I think that finding those pathways, finding clever solutions to the way in which we both plan, design and procure new infrastructure. I'm excited that the ACT government has embraced the idea of unsolicited bids, and that's a way of actually opening up the opportunity to say, if people have great IP, people have great ideas about the way in which they would like to see Canberra transformed, well, let's share that, but let's do that in a public and transparent way so that there is an opportunity for people to assess the merits of those good ideas.
Emma?
I'm the head of Capital Metro, which is building light rail, and we've been working the last couple of years pretty hard to work through our procurement process. But what's excited me about coming to Canberra is I arrived here in 2013, and I think at a time that is just so exciting for Canberra. There are so many choices that we're being given now, choices of where we're living, choices about where we go out to eat, choices about how we travel internationally or otherwise. It's just a time of lots and lots of choices coming through to us, and I think for light rail and what we're doing with that, we're adding to the choices that we have in Canberra about how we move around the city and how we connect in the city. And as we progress and develop into Transport Canberra, which is all about increasing the integration, increasing those choices, I think we're just adding to the benefits of living in the city and being able to really benefit from not only just the transport, but how we're living and how we're moving, who's visiting, how we're getting around beyond our city boundaries. So it is an exciting time to be in Canberra, and it's an exciting time across Australia as well. And the Infrastructure Australia report was just released yesterday, and again it highlights the need for the work that all of us are collectively doing in infrastructure to really be at the forefront in our country and develop all the infrastructure that we need to continue with the growth. I think it says in that Infrastructure Australia report that Australia's growth population rates are higher now than the UK and the US, which is pretty astounding, and Canberra is just one of those cities that's experiencing that massive growth. So with all the work that we're doing, we have to keep up with the infrastructure to support the lifestyles that we've got today.
Thank you. Stephen?
When I talk about what I'm excited about, I want to say I'm relieved at first because we've been working on something for quite a little while. I think obviously the opportunity that comes from the flights to Wellington and Singapore is the transformational opportunity that is for Canberra. And I think the fact that it will trigger significant investment right across the city, whether it's one person thinking about setting up a restaurant or doing a new fit out in their restaurant, to doing a new winery, to building a new hotel, to driving further investment in, say, the Mount Stromlo facility, to the region. And one of the most exciting things about it is the way the region is responding to this. It's hard to believe. I think they're almost more excited than us, and the people in this town are pretty excited, that's for sure. But I think they get it, and I think they've, over the last decade, realised the importance and role of Canberra. 30 years ago, they were probably the people that were the biggest critics of Canberra as a city. Now they're our biggest fans, and they understand what our role is. And of course, their role in working with us through this opportunity is very significant. They have a huge element of the tourism experience and the sort of travel that the people that are going to come here want. They have the freight that's going to come from the Lachlan Valley, from the south coast with the seafood that's going to come here and get on these aircraft to fly up to Asia. So, you know, the exciting thing is that, I think too, about companies that we met up there that are defence companies and said, well, you know, we'd love to be in Canberra, we'd love to have a business in Canberra, and you know, they're international companies, and we'd be in Canberra, but you don't have international flights, so we're not going to be there. So I think it is going to be quite transformational over the next 5 years, in some ways faster and sometimes a bigger change in the 5 to 10 year period.
Thank you, Stephen. I've got my first question to the group, quite a broad one. Infrastructure is central to economic and social prosperity, and I could say also that it's the way you do it also impacts on the environment. How would you, given what you've said, Stephen, how would you rate the ACT's record in attracting world-class infrastructure, and based on where we're at now, where do you think we're heading?
I mean, you know, in this sort of political environment, you're tempted to sort of ask the question and think about, you know, the record since Andrew Barr's been Chief Minister in 12 months or 2 years or 3 years. I think clearly in that space what we're doing is quite impressive and very significant, whether it's the work that Emma's responsible for with the government, or whether it's, you know, issues like the Majura Parkway, where the government was successful in attracting that under John Stanhope and Katie Gallagher, and that project is at last nearly finished. But it's significant. But the other thing is, we shouldn't be shy about thinking longer term into the past about how we've delivered infrastructure in the city. We have a first-rate city because of the quality of the infrastructure in the city. And that includes the parks, the streetscapes as much as the bitumen between the curbs. And that's a product of you know, generations of government, of the NCDC and the like. And you know, in today's microcosm, we sort of think about today's government and have they in the last week done enough? Well, let's be proud of the city that we've got that has been planned fantastically well.
Thank you. Malcolm, remember anything to add to that, our world-class infrastructure and where we're heading?
Well, I think it's a case of the right infrastructure in the right place. You know, as a city planner, I think one of the things we still don't do particularly well, which is acknowledged in Infrastructure Australia report, is that elusive thing called integrated land use and transport planning. And notwithstanding our great planning DNA as a city, I think that that if we are wanting to recognise that we just can't keep consuming greenfield land to the extent that we are, and that we're now pushing over the New South Wales border with all sorts of land development projects, if we are truly serious about recognising that trip times are increasing. I mean, we say aren't we lucky we live in Canberra with our generous road geometry? But the reality is that on an annual basis, we are seeing trip times increase as people are forced further and further out. Now, in Sydney and Melbourne, you know, the trip times can be, you know, far in excess of that. But we need to learn the lessons of the big cities and say we have an opportunity right now, notwithstanding the fact that we've just clicked over for 100 years, but we can learn the lessons that other cities are now grappling with, those wicked problems, if we actually take the right steps now, whether it be through further investment in public transport infrastructure, which I think is critical, to winning ourselves off our dependency on cars in the city, to actually recognising that if we had a proper strategic land use planning vision about the importance of urban consolidation, of densification, of creating mixed-use precincts which actually provide those choices that Emma's talking about, not just in public transport but in housing, we can start to address a whole series of issues. So I suppose what I'm arguing for very strongly is a much more overt approach to the way in which we do that forward planning. I was a bit horrified recently to have a conversation with Icon Water, who had suddenly found out that the sewerage storage tank beneath one of our roads, Commonwealth Avenue, was way under capacity to service the planned development of Northbourne Corridor. Now, you'd hope that infrastructure agencies and planning authorities are working together to understand those forecast projections and say we're well ahead of those land use planning initiatives, and we can actually put in place the things that we need to do, whether it be water, sewerage, gas, broadband. But we know where we're going, we know which parts of the city we want to redevelop, and we have a clear plan, an integrated plan to actually achieve that. And I think we could do more in that regard in this city.
Thanks, Mark. Emma, I was going to say, it's a segue to you a little bit, because light rail will drive development in the corridor. And I guess I've got written here, contribute to Canberra's productivity and economic and social prosperity. Can you tell us about what light rail is going to do to the corridor?
Of course,
Yep.
and probably further to Malcolm's point, we have set out with this project always to keep it as an integrated light rail and urban development project. Even though the scope of our work is around building light rail, we're still very interested and believe it's very, very important to keep the urban development going to the same extent. And we've been working very closely with the NCA and with our fellow colleagues in our Environment and Planning Directorate to make sure that we set up the right framework for that to happen. But I think what's really important to note is that we're creating, and this work that we've all done collectively and that you pointed out has been done over a period of time, is starting now to really attract the attention of a much more global group of people. And our project is just one example of that, and I'm sure Stephen has others, and there are plenty of others around in Canberra, but we have such significant international investment going on in our project, where we have companies from Japan, Spain, Germany, all putting in and all investing in our city to build our infrastructure of the future. And I think that's, just highlights just how important the infrastructure that we're building is and how we can attract that international investment and consideration for Canberra.
Thanks, Emma. Stephen, Singapore Airlines, I think we're all very excited by that, and it's been something that's been in the making for a while. What I'm really interested in, what were the attributes of Canberra and your discussions that made this successful? So things like the ACT government support, the obvious upgrades that have been done to the airport, and that global interest of flying into Canberra. Can you give us some insights into what were the recipes of success?
I think it was, a range of things. Firstly, persistence, and that's not just because it took a long time, but also culturally, that's a very significant thing in terms of doing business in Asia, and that for me and for our family and business was a new thing. I think the partnership with government was significant, and we often don't understand that, or it's not always a part of business in Australia, but it's a very significant part of business there. Andrew Barr led the first mission up there before we went, and that paved the way and made us have a better first meeting. Then eventually, last year probably the critical meeting was when we met with the chairman of Singapore Airlines. And we wouldn't have got that meeting, but we got it because we were with the Chief Minister of the ACT. I think the other thing, of course, was selling the inbound tourism. They're very interested in the outbound, and the fact that Australians, that Canberrans have 18% more incomes than the national average is very significant, but they also wanted to believe in the inbound tourism story. And we were able to do that by explaining to them the sorts of things that had changed over the last 5 years, the sorts of hotel product that had been delivered at the Realm, at East Hotel, the new Acton precinct, Braddon, tell the stories, as I said, about Mount Stromlo. Wine, the development of the wine industry in the last 20 years, and particularly the leadership by Tim Kirk, but of course people like Ken Helm as well. But to go over there at the first meeting with the person who's a deputy CEO and be able to give them as a gift a bottle of Clonakilla wine, and for him to say, I appreciate that gift, I respect it, I understand it, because I have some of these in my cellar at home. I mean, we thought we were nearly home. That was 3 years ago. Maybe he was waiting for it to drink it and, mature. So it was all of those elements, and I think, as we look forward, the key thing is going to be to continue to invest in the product. You look at the casino. Personally, I'm not so much into gambling, and I see the issues around that, but the reality is that there's a world-class development there from what is currently not a world-class product. We need to grab hold of that opportunity and deliver it now. It's significant.
Thanks, Stephen. My next question was along the lines of what do we need to do now that we have these changes in the airport and light rail coming on, and maybe Malcolm and Emma, if you've got any insights into what you think what is this going to mean to Canberra beyond the fact that we'll be able to get from Gungahlin to town quicker. We can fly in people directly into Canberra. The Chief Minister outlined a few ideas that are on the table at the moment with City of the Lake and new stadiums, the Australia Forum or a new convention centre. How do you see what you're involved in? What are the next sort of areas of growth or priorities or could be for the government?
One of the things I consider is just what's driving us economically here, and that there's a great will in Canberra for us to become beyond a public service town and to have support for this great digital economy that we've got, great support for the education, the universities, and we just saw recently where ADFA and UNSW opened their doors to have engineering students in Canberra, which is really exciting news. Also the defence industry. So how do we attract all of the best and brightest of these industries to come and want to live in Canberra? And light rail is just one part of that. People graduates, two graduate families, people who are coming into these industries really want cities that are just humming and that are convenient and where they can move around easily, and that their lifestyle is supported by being close to them in terms of where they work and where they play sport, and what sort of things are on offer to them. So light rail is just an element of that, but it really helps towards contributing to that economy. And if you look along the corridor already, it's not just a Gungahlin to city, but already we're starting to see some of the properties along Northbourne Avenue being developed. There's a great consideration of what Epic could become with that connectivity. So this is not just about some people jumping on a train to go to work every day, but really driving and helping our whole economy grow and attract the people of the future to our city.
While you're at it, how is the next stages going to be planned? What is the process we will go through, do you think?
I think there's the start of that at the moment with the light rail network that has been put out into the public, and some early consultation on that. But I think we need more conversation on where the next stages might fit, and then ultimately it'll be decisions of governments of the day to fund and build upon. But I think as we start to build, especially with Transport Canberra, and start to get a better public transport system, which was again highlighted in the Infrastructure Australia report that just came out, I think we'll start to see more strategy built around that and where we might need to connect next.
Thank you. This is a question that's vexed my mind for many a time, Malcolm. It's for you in your role. You are responsible for delivering the National Capital Plan. I talked about transformation, so it seems like there's a balancing act between the vision of the city and our strong planning background and where we're heading to in the future. So is it hard to balance the two, and how do you do it? How do you approach it?
Well, the recent review of the National Capital Plan was in effect a restatement of those elements that we distilled as representing and mean to be the things that truly are nationally significant. I mean, you can't plan the future without understanding the past, and there are many aspects of the way in which Canberra has been laid out that, as I said earlier, we still enjoy, and which go to that very strong sense of place that Canberra has. And the moment we take planning decisions or infrastructure decisions which erode that and can turn it slowly and inexorably towards a city that could be almost anywhere, then I think we've really lost the plot. So I think this is where the tension is, that many people are talking about this kind of transformation, and yet there is a very high proportion of people, perhaps yourself, who've lived here all their lives, who still think of the old Canberra, as it were. And it's about reconciling, I suppose, the the tension that I can sense exists between what you'd say is those who still would like to see, not so much old Canberra, but Canberra being respected for what it is as the national capital, one that in our own charter is about a city that all Australians can be proud of, and that's really important. We need to hang on to and protect, indeed strengthen those very qualities that make us different as a city, that make us very attractive to all the things that Emma and Stephen have been talking about in terms of attracting footloose investment. But I think the key to it, and it seems perhaps a bit odd to be talking about it at an infrastructure seminar, but for me as a planner, the key, when I look at other cities' very successful trajectories in relation to, in some cases, dealing with wicked problems, or in the case of Detroit, something really, really serious, but new world cities that have really lifted themselves up by the bootstraps to reimagine who they should be, what type of city they want to be. And that's nothing to do with hardware, that's to do with what I call urban software. That's about relationships, it's about collaboration, it's about saying we're all on the same journey here. We think we want the same, we want this to be a great city, we want to still have this quality of life. But what are going to be the mechanisms, particularly around urban governance, that are going to deliver that? And I think that in this city still is a live debate. It's pleasing to see the ACT government having gone through a long and extensive process about its new planning statement, and I commend the ACT government for the fact that it has taken a long and considered time to hear what the voices are saying about the sort of city people want, and I think we can really capitalise on that. But if we are to steepen the trajectory of change, which I think we need to do, and not just fall back into our complacent business as usual, I think he called it, approach, we do need to find new ways of, new conversations, new connections, and I think the key to it, when I look at all those new world and old world cities that have faced those problems and really have presented themselves on the global stage in a transformed way, it's insightful to dig deeper and understand who were the players, what were the circumstances that led to that transformation or shift, that paradigm shift in thinking. So it's the thinking bit that I think is really important in this city, and for us not to just ease back and say she'll be right, someone will come right across the horizon and give us these great ideas. I think we need to create the preconditions and the messages beyond Australia even to actually say exploiting the things that Stephen's been talking about in terms of, say, the Singapore connection. These are all great opportunities for us.
Stephen, then, as a business leader and a Canberran, how's Malcolm going in his... how are we going? What do you think we should be doing?
How's Malcolm going?
Yes.
Which Malcolm? Gets me off the hook. Yeah. I mean, slightly different to the question. We weren't overly prepared for these specific questions, but it was, I think I was in fact going to say that the National Capital Plan is a very significant document for our city, and I think it's very important to have that as an overarching plan for the national capital, and our national capital role is very significant. I think the document should be used as an inspiration for the sort of thinking that Malcolm's talking about, rather than a sort of a dead bat to try and stop things happen. And I think it can be an inspiration, and sort of the changes that have happened to that plan in the last 12 months are part of that. I think also we've got to acknowledge the NCA, the institution itself, is critically important to our city in terms of its link to the national government that has control of the major budget. Canberra as a national capital is in many ways half-built. Fantastic start, the inspiration of Walter Burley Griffin and his wife Marion, but we need the continued commitment of the federal government to this city and the building of Australia's national capital, and my view is that the NCA is the instrumental piece in that. You can't walk away from it. One other tack on to that is, of course, the Australia Forum, and we know how important that is for business events, for the convention industry and for the city. But it's also a piece of national infrastructure for the country, and I think if and when it's built, it will be just as important for embedding this city as a place for national conversation and policy as it will be for our local economy, for jobs and activity. And that's one reason that again ties back to the NCA. Malcolm?
Yeah, look, I think that's absolutely right, and it concerns me that you've got city councils and state governments lobbying very strongly to take those new cultural institutions, when and if they come around, to their cities. So the very thing that actually is part of our, and must be part of our ongoing strength as a city, which is our national capital functions, which is the home of cultural institutions, which places cities like Washington play up significantly, Ottawa. These are all cities that I think far better than Canberra understand the role of their national capitals in not just the national psyche, but in terms of their societies. And we in Australia, I think, have this strange relationship with our national capital. And I think, part of my challenge it really is to try and shift those perceptions, to perhaps get the Macquarie Dictionary to remove the word Canberra bashing, from that publication. But maybe that will never happen because that's inevitable. But the fact is that I think we need to hold on to and jealously guard those attempts to weaken the very things that make us different, make us not just nationally significant, but make us important and distinctive as a city. And that has a lot to do with infrastructure in terms of what I call, as an urban designer, place capital. The fact that we should be investing in cultural infrastructure. We should be investing in green infrastructure. This preoccupation with grey infrastructure in cities. And finally, I think Infrastructure Australia understands that, because an organisation I'm with has been lobbying them very heavily to understand that green infrastructure for Australia, and it's pleasing to see Minister Hunt talk about the importance of tree canopies, to talk about parks. How can you have urban consolidation without having the public open spaces to support those inner city populations? And I think those aspects, those dimensions of infrastructure planning in Australia have been woefully underestimated, and it's pleasing to hear a Prime Minister and, up until recently, a Minister for Cities talking about those things. Yeah.
Before I'm about to throw it up for questions from the floor, just on the green infrastructure question, what role do you think the national government can play?
Well, I think there's an enormous opportunity, a very different opportunity from the one perhaps during the time when Labor was certainly pushing a very strong cities agenda. I think in most established advanced economies, national government is playing a role in the way in which cities are being planned and the way infrastructure is being funded. We all know the stats. Cities produce the bulk of our GDP in this country, and yet there's been a woeful involvement, I think, by national government in working with state government. This is where federalism gets in the way, I suppose, but it is very encouraging to see the Turnbull government talking about those types of relationships, to setting a very clear policy agenda to support the efforts of state governments to have very clear plans in place, integrated with metropolitan planning strategies, and I think that's the key thing. Infrastructure Australia is now recognising that good metropolitan planning, taking into account having very clear policies around urban renewal, as clear opportunities for those cities to address growth, I think are really encouraging signs. So it would just be great if we did have a specific portfolio around it, perhaps. Yeah.
Thank you. Questions?
Stephen Harmer from Lend Lease. We've seen over recent times procurement agencies in particular have an aspiration for value capture on projects and yet struggle to realise those values through the procurement process. So I'm wondering what we have to do to provide a sustainable framework for recognising value capture and freeing up the capital we're desiring to have invested in, places like Canberra.
Do you want me to have a go? All right. Yeah, it is a really good question. I think the Prime Minister's started a pretty important discussion on that at the moment and just released a paper, maybe it was late last week or early this week, on exactly that subject, and has been thinking far more broadly towards it. And Dr. Peter Newman, who's kind of one of the forefathers of value capture from over in Perth, who was on the Infrastructure Australia board, has been feeding into that. I think it's a difficult... value captures sort of come with a lot of poor connotations, and I think maybe we need to change some of our language around it. I heard recently, I think Victoria are referring to it as value sharing, which maybe is a better terminology. It scares people because they perceive it's related to other taxes and bad things, but in truth, we know that infrastructure creates value, and it's as simple as at least cordoning that value off and at least understanding what we're getting from it and doing something with it. And I think that as a notion is really sensible. It's just that governments need to get their heads around how to make it work in each of their respective areas.
I think we'd try and avoid what happened in Fisherman's Bend, where, you know, ministers for planning announced zoning changes ahead of infrastructure planning. And I think it's an object lesson that we need to do the planning ahead of the actual, you know, the infrastructure planning, I should say, work out your costings so that we can service these new communities. And I think, you know, the value capture component associated with urban renewal in particular is a really delicate balance there. But we do have enough understanding of how projects like Docklands, maybe not so much Barangaroo, but certainly we have enough knowledge now to understand post-occupancy, post-development, what other levers we should be pulling to provide the kind of incentive that the development community needs, but at the same time that, you know, after the margins have been realised, that the community is actually left with tangible benefits.
Carl Jenkins from WSP Parsons Brinkhoff. I guess, Steve, you've been the beneficiary to a certain extent of Canberra being defined as at the centre of what you might call the Canberra economic region. I think a challenge that's emerging as time goes by is that there's something of an artificial boundary in that economic region in the ACT New South Wales border. What can we do, and it's a question for the entire panel, I guess, what can we do as industry and as government to try and have the region get the economic infrastructure it needs to function as an economy?
Well, I think part of what has occurred in the tourism space is again through Andrew Barr's leadership as tourism minister, was to get the regions together, and they have the Canberra CBR, JRO, and they see themselves, I think they've got 10 out of the 12 local councils, and they see themselves as one entity, one brand, one, you know, group of products within the same region. We are one, we're homogenous. We had a freight symposium at the airport last week, and they came along with that view. They all came along, and we also had the New South Wales government, and of course, out of our 900,000 people that we talk about being in our international passenger catchment, 58% of them are in New South Wales, yet it was Andrew Barr that did the heavy lifting and the ACT government that did the heavy lifting with Singapore Airlines and the like. And the New South Wales was the passenger there. So we had to get him there, and we had Andrew Constance, member for Bega, Minister for Infrastructure and Transport, key guy. He starts off, says, I love Canberra. That's his first thing. And then he talks about how important Canberra is to this whole region. Then he talks about one of the main freight blockages, pinch points, it was his word, is the Barton Highway duplication. So all of a sudden, and maybe it's not all of a sudden, there's probably a bit of work in the background, you've got the New South Wales government engaged and focused on an infrastructure component that is going to service Canberra as the centre of the region. So I think we're getting there, but certainly it is true, we do need to engage the New South Wales government. So that's a good point.
I thought, Malcolm, you might add something.
Oh, look, I think those interjurisdictional problems have to fall away. I'm involved in the water, just on a smaller project, a water catchment project, where there is extraordinary goodwill amongst all the regional councils and the ACT government around that great initiative. And we have a direct involvement because we're at the end of the pipe, and Lake Burley Griffin, you know, at times is not swimmable as a result of very poor catchment management practices in New South Wales. Now, you know, through good cooperative effort, and I guess the proof of the pudding will be in how it translates into clean water in Lake Burley Griffin, I guess, but certainly I'm really pleased to see the level of cooperation, to have people from the New South Wales government sitting around that table, not just saying the right things, but actually committing to land management practices, planning reform and other things that will actually achieve what the region wants. You know, forget where the red line is. You know, we're talking about natural units, so we need to, you know, work within that construct, and it's, I think there are some really positive signs.
Emma, light rail out to Yass. Is that the stage 7?
Well, I have met the Yass mayor once who was very interested in light rail, as is the Queanbeyan mayor, so who knows what might happen next. But, I don't, you know, there's commitment, genuine commitment from the Chief Minister down across all levels of ACT government to better integrate with New South Wales and understand where those points of connection can be. And certainly, as we talk about a broader integrated transport system, we recognise that there's a lot of people who contribute to our economy here in Canberra who come from outside of Canberra's boundaries. So it is a really critical issue for all of us.
Thank you. I think we have time for one or two questions. One at the back there.
Hi, Simon Francois was interesting. Malcolm, you mentioned two things that I wouldn't mind some further comment on. One was about this carless future. If you were king for the day and could design things for 10 years' time, what would you do in terms of our infrastructure to make that happen? And the second question was, you mentioned that to get a city of the likes of others who have made major growth, that actually it's about culture and, I suppose, a whole mindset. Do you have a few key themes that you think we as a region need to pick up? So sorry there's two questions in that one, but be interested to hear you on both of those.
Yeah, look, if I was king for the day, I mean, I catch a bus to work every day, and I'm a big believer in public transport. You'd expect me to be as a planner perhaps, but what I would like to see is a light rail system being supported by a bus system that, you know, achieves the kind of utilisation that we need, where you have true mode exchange happening. And that is a crucial, you know, component of that integrated land use planning that I talked about. I would also like to see, I think, a resolution of what I call the tension between our city and town centres in Canberra. I think that's an unresolved question at the moment. There's no doubt real issues with civic. You can't have a national capital without a thriving, vibrant city centre, and at the moment the city centre falls well short of that experience in my view. But there are, again, things in place that the ACT government is seeking to do to address that, and that's encouraging. But I think it's that ability to have the broader community come along with you on that journey, and I think that's really important. If we get everyone in the room with us to have those sort of conversations, inevitably there'll be the naysayers, the vocal minority, but we do need to have a collective vision, having taken the community along with us on that journey as to what type of city we want. So if I was king for a day, I wouldn't be making edicts. I'd be listening to what my subjects had to say about what kind of kingdom they wanted.
Refreshing.
Yeah,
Look, you'll be king tomorrow as well.
King of Canberra. Look, I think, yeah, I think the key point about your second question is that the notion of urban leadership is a collective notion. Yes, we have elected representatives, that's important, but I think Canberra has more talented and smart people than any other city in Australia. That's a fact. We have more people with postgraduate qualifications than any other city in Australia. So we have, the ability to be able to sit down and harness, I guess, that potential. But we also need to recognise that we have other great institutions like ANU, our universities. These are places of high capacity that really should be contributing, as they do in those other cities, to finding pathways, finding solutions, collaborating on what those possibilities might be. So that's just a small insight, but it is this notion that we need to be supporting government. It's not a contest, it's not an adversarial relationship, it's actually a supportive relationship. And I think there are, again, some strong indications that we will move towards that model eventually.
Thanks, Malcolm. Time for one more question.
Lloyd Smith is my name, from Gerard Daniels. My question is to Stephen. Stephen, securing Singapore Airlines is a wonderful achievement. What are the economic conditions that are on your mind at the moment to make sure that, one, you retain that, but also grow it as well in terms of other airlines?
I think, yeah, I appreciate that question. I think it is critical that we ensure that it's successful, and obviously we do have a federal government that's got some budgetary pressures, and it has its natural impact on our local economy. I do think that this does provide a major upside jolt that will be immediate from September the 21st when those flights start. So I think that is a positive that will help in an ongoing sense. But certainly it's true, we need the cultural institutions firing on all cylinders, absolutely firing over the next 2 years. And obviously there's sort of a death by 1,000 cuts. They're on their, 5th or 8th round of cuts. And I think when you've got a piece of infrastructure like we've got as a nation in those collections and facilities, now is not the time to finalise the strangulation program that both governments have been parties to. If you're going to have a national capital, you're going to have these institutions. It is good for the country to have a national capital with international flights, and that's why the Australian government, and particularly Andrew Robb, and indeed the embassy in Singapore, was so helpful and a huge part of that. It's in their national government interest for this to succeed and for us to go from 4 a week to 7 a week. So we need that to be firing on all cylinders, and I suppose we've just got to make the case and let them see the opportunity and join in seeing and capturing that opportunity as well.
Thanks, Dave. On that positive note, thank you for your time and great efforts, and thanks for the great questions from the floor. I've enjoyed it very much. Thank you.